So if you're not familiar with Pete Hegseth, he is a longtime Fox News contributor, which is probably where most people are familiar with him.
And where Trump got to know him, no doubt, right?
I'm sure that is where Trump got to know him, but he has been named the Secretary of Defense appointment. He's been
up here.
Named as Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense. And, I actually got a little bit ahead of the curve saying he's been named Secretary of Defense because most of the time you can kind of assume that. I'm curious, genuinely, even with a Republican Senate, what happens with the Pete Hegseth nominee, because it was a full-blown freak out. Lobbyists were furiously texting Politico reporters, who the F is Pete Hegseth? You can imagine the wailing and gnashing of teeth that was happening literally at the Pentagon when this announcement came out around, like 9 p.m. last night. Just sort of exploded, even for Trump. This was a quote that a lobbyist gave, and I think it's kind of funny. I mean, I agree with it, not in the way that the lobbyist does, but even for Trump, you're sort of grading on a curve with his weird appointments. This one sort of was surprising still, even in its weirdness. But before he was over at Fox, Pete Hegseth was, he's from Minnesota. He went to Princeton undergrad, Harvard Kennedy School for his master's.
Trump loves those credentials.
He really loves those credentials. Although Pete Hegseth says that he sent his Harvard degree back, he mailed it back to Harvard, and then
Trump loves that even more.
I'm sure Trump loves that. He enlisted and served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He has 2 Bronze Stars. He's decorated, and he went and worked with a group that both of us are pretty familiar with, which is the Concerned Veterans for America. He was the CEO of that group. So it's a pretty, it is a pretty unorthodox pick. There's no question about that.
And we'll talk more about him at the end of this block. He's kind of an America First guy, but also like a messianic kind of Israel supporter in a over the top way. One of his top accomplishments previously in lobbying Trump was to talk him into pardoning Eddie Gallagher, who became this kind of hero on the right, or for some elements of the right, but committed just straight up war crimes and became this kind of cause célèbre. Because you try to find some factions try to find the worst war criminal and then defend them to then expand the bounds of what's possible. And Hegseth was in on that and lobbying Trump on that pardon.
Yeah, he was definitely lobbying Trump on the pardon. Sagar posted last night, he said, "I know this about Pete Hegseth. On Ukraine, at least, he's absolutely solid about ending the war. And I also know the Pentagon brass will absolutely lose it over his pick. They tried to nuke him in the first term, but it seems he may get the last laugh." That's an allusion to Trump attempting to nominate Hegseth for Veterans Affairs last time he was president, and it just didn't work because exactly some of the reasons we're talking about. There was this institutional opposition or even disgust to plucking someone from a News Corp studio in Manhattan and bringing them to an appointment in D.C. Now, that's why I'm genuinely curious what happens in the Senate with this nomination. There's a lot of, on the right, people are pretty damn happy about it because it's sort of sticking it to the Pentagon and, saying, basically screw your credentials, screw your, obviously he has the Ivy League pedigree, but, screw your Jake Sullivans. This guy, he might not talk like Jake Sullivan, but he has a better sort of on the ground understanding both of where the public is and where everyone else is, and where, what happens if you're an actual combat veteran, et cetera, et cetera. That said, there's obviously concerns you could imagine a Lindsey Graham having about the managerial task of actually overseeing the Pentagon.
Yeah, and also Lindsey Graham Lindsey Graham's not really an America Firster. He loves every war, including the one in Ukraine and elsewhere. And so if Hegseth is going to be pushing back against some of those conflicts, even if he is kind of more militant when it comes to, say, Israel, or not more than Lindsey Graham when it comes to Israel, but equally so, it'll be interesting. Do you think that, how do you think recess appointments and the Senate are even going to factor in here? Because we'll know more by the end of this show, perhaps, when the Senate votes. Senate is voting this morning on who its leader will be. Trump had said that he wants a leader who's going to allow recess appointments so he can breeze people through.
Yeah.
We'll see how the Senate feels about that, because that's the Senate sacrificing some of its power to the executive. What's your sense? Will he just name acting people?
I think he would gladly name acting people, and that's kind of the leverage he has over the Senate to confirm people. So yes, that's the Senate leader, I think, will probably acquiesce to recess appointments because
But if you're Pentagon secretary, you want a confirmed position because he's going to have problems managing the Pentagon as it is.
Right.
And
that's a good point.
If he's not an officially confirmed member of the cabinet, then his enemies inside the bureaucracy will use that. Say, oh, sorry, I didn't CC you on that. Yeah. You're not actually in the job.
Yeah.
So when you are, let us know.
Right. That's a really good point. So that's I think probably another reason that they're gunning for the recess appointments, which basically is just an easier way for the Senate to get around appointing. Do you want to explain the recess appointment? We'll talk about it a little in the Senate block. But
basically, in the Constitution, it says if the Senate is recessed, which it used to be back when they traveled, from Wyoming to Washington by horse,
right,
for many months, if the Senate was in recess, then the president could appoint somebody. And that person would serve until the next term's recess or whatever.
Yeah.
And so what previous presidents have done is they try to get their Senate leader to kind of go into recess for a certain amount of time so that they can then put people into office through a recess appointment.
Without going through the nomination vote.
Bush tried to do this a lot when Democrats were blocking him. And Bush would presidents try to do it because even if their own party controls the Senate sometimes, because the Senate is just slow and annoying.
Right.
And so that's why you often see, if you turn on C-SPAN and it says they're in pro forma session, the reason they're in pro forma session is because then they're not in recess. That's to block the president from making any appointments.
Right.
But we're not doing any work, but we could. So don't try to
We are prepared to work.
So don't try to slip anybody through here.
Last thing I think about Pete Hegseth here is Dan Caldwell, who is, I think he used to work at Concerned Vets. He posted last night, I have known Pete Hegseth for over a decade. Like a lot of vets, his foreign policy views evolved as the forever wars dragged on and their costs soared. If you're calling him a neocon, you have no clue what you're talking about. I think that's accurate.
Right.
There's some clips dropping of Pete Hegseth talking about Ukraine early in the war, talking about different he changed his mind on Iraq, for example. He was like a vehement defender of the war in Iraq, which is sort of understandable when he served. He had a different level of insight into the conflict than a lot of the keyboard jockeys now criticizing him for that. But his views have shifted, like many people, and that's to his credit. I would say that's being intellectually honest with yourself, especially having served and coming back and sort of looking at American foreign policy through a different lens. So, there's something very interesting about this appointment. It is completely unorthodox. It is Trump-loving Fox and Friends. I get all of that. I also think it's like the Pentagon is an abject disgrace right now, and it's going to be actually sort of enjoyable to watch the freak out.
And Dan Caldwell, you mentioned there, he's a strong anti-war, anti-neocon voice.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this show interesting because it would be easy to flatten Hegseth as just the maniac that he is when it relates to Israel, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But it's much more complicated and nuanced than that.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. Yeah, he's shifted along with a lot of people who sort of watched the experiment of post-Vietnam imperialism play out and has been a part of that actual experience. So he's an interesting guy. I've interviewed him before. He's pretty thoughtful. So Dan and the people at Concerned Vets now, it sort of gets pegged as a Koch group. And it was funded by the Koch brothers.
The Kochs the Kochs partly fund the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, where Trita Parsi and others are at. So Kochs are interesting when it comes to foreign policy.
Right. So it's just sort of funny to see the neocon.
Their money comes from the Soviet Union, so you got to love that. I'm not making that up. Go Google that.
So it's just funny to see him get pegged as a neocon. And we'll talk more in a moment, but we also have to get to the Elon and Vivek
we'll get back
news.
to foreign policy, but yes.
Like we said, last night there was a flurry of appointments coming out after, 8 p.m. We had the show basically set, and then, we kept getting more and more, one of which was the news about Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy now heading up the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE.
Co-heads.
Yeah.
Co-chairs of this fake commission. So
Except it's not fake. It is real.
It's a not basically it's a private non-governmental commission that will be able to advise the government on what it ought to do.
It's giving